My brother brutally injured my elderly dad in an attempt on my life, so I finally pressed charges. 8 months later, he came crawling back for forgiveness and immediately betrayed me by destroying Dad's funeral. Growing up, my brother was the kind of person who got a thrill out of biting people and hurting small animals. When I was 6, my mom walked out because of him, even though she thinks it was because of me. What happened was my brother stole her jewelry and planted it under my bed alongside a knife, with a note saying, "Don't take these back, Mommy. I'll hurt you. Love, my name." This was confirmation to her I was insane, as my brother had already convinced her into thinking I was crazy with similar acts prior to this one. She packed her bags and left, but Dad stayed, and he saw through my brother like an X-ray. He walked straight up to him and forced him to call my mom, forced him to explain it was him. He knew it wouldn't bring her back to us, but he knew I deserved not to be blamed for what he did. That was basically my life. My brother would try to ruin me, and my dad would protect me from him. When my brother used violence against me, my dad would stand between us. When my brother pulled knives on me, my dad would point to the locked safe box with his firearm. He was never afraid of my brother, and he was my hero for it. But the older we got, the worse my brother became. At 16, he reported Dad to CPS, claiming abuse. Social workers showed up unannounced, asking humiliating questions, examining bruises that my brother had given himself. I remember Dad sitting at the kitchen table afterward, face pale. He managed to clear his name, but not before losing his job and having his new girlfriend dump him due to the investigation. Dad had us at 52, so he was already pretty old, but he got much weaker after that. It's like he aged 10 years during that 1 month. But even still, he protected me from my brother. At least he tried, until the night my brother showed up at our house one evening. He was doped up, drunk, and furious. He accused me of being the reason Dad never liked him. In front of us both, he went insane. He charged at me, his fists balled. He was older, heavier, stronger. I was gonna get mauled. I was sure of it. But of course, like always, Dad moved between us. He was old and weak by now, but it didn't stop him. Unfortunately, he couldn't overpower my brother. My brother shoved him so hard he slammed against the wall, collapsing instantly. But even still, while on the floor, Dad saved me. He mustered up enough strength to yell at my brother, telling him the cops are already on their way. It was a bluff, but my brother bought it. He ran out as fast as he could. To say I was thankful was an understatement. I was safe, but the damage to my dad was done. I took him to the hospital, and doctors said that given Dad's age, 4 broken ribs and a split scalp were serious. We pressed charges for the first time ever, yet my brother somehow managed to escape getting sentenced, walking away with 200 hours of community service. But he still saw this as unjust, and he used this 200 hours to get his revenge. Dad only lived for about 8 months after that accident. In his final weeks, I stayed beside him constantly. On his last night, Dad took my hand, squeezed weakly, and whispered a final warning about my brother, urging me never to trust him again. He died quietly a few hours later. The funeral arrangements started up very soon, and that's when my brother returned. I hadn't seen him in almost a year. The first time I saw him, my throat closed up and I wanted to run. I was sure he was going to try hurt me, but he didn't. Instead, he begged me for forgiveness. He promised to me that he wanted closure and peace between us. He told me that the community service gave him time to reflect and that he's realized how big of a piece of crap he was. He said he knows he doesn't deserve forgiveness, but as a Christian, maybe I could find it in my heart to forgive him. And right then, blinded by grief, I believed him again. I agreed that he could attend the funeral, but nothing else. No speeches or showmanship. He agreed. The funeral home was full a few days later. Dad's friends, co-workers, neighbors, all gathered to mourn the greatest man I've ever met. I spoke first, then my dad's sister. But when everyone was finished, my brother stood from the first row and approached the podium. An uneasy quiet instantly settled over the room. I was taken aback, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to cause a scene. I regret that so much. As soon as my brother started speaking, the illusion of him changing shattered. He lowered his head, faked choking back tears, and in the most devastated and depressing tone I have ever heard, began describing, in very graphic detail, the horrific things he claimed Dad had done to him as a child. I froze in my seat, completely stunned. My brother Wayne was painting this picture of our father as some kind of monster. He talked about beatings that never happened, locked closets that didn't exist in our house, and starvation that was completely made up. I looked around the room and saw the shocked faces of everyone who knew my dad. Some people were crying, others looked disgusted. A few were glancing at me with confusion and pity. My Aunt Doris, Dad's sister, grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. She whispered something about stopping him, but I couldn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. Wayne's voice kept getting louder, more dramatic with each lie. He was putting on the performance of his life. Finally, I snapped out of it. I stood up so fast, my chair fell backward with a crash. Everyone turned to look at me. I marched up to the podium, my whole body shaking. Wayne smirked at me when I got close. That same smirk he'd had his whole life when he knew he was hurting me. I grabbed the microphone from him and told everyone he was lying. My voice cracked. I was crying and probably sounded hysterical. Wayne immediately switched to looking concerned. He put his arm around me like he was comforting me. He told everyone I was in denial about the abuse, that I'd blocked it out because it was too painful. He said this in the gentlest, most understanding voice, like he was the sane one. Some of Dad's oldest friends stood up for me. His buddy Matthew from work came up and physically moved Wayne away from me. Dad's neighbor Victoria started telling people about how she'd seen Wayne hurting animals in our yard when we were kids, but the damage was done. The funeral was completely ruined. Wayne slipped out during the chaos. I spent the rest of the reception trying to explain the truth to people, but I could tell many weren't sure what to believe. I went home that night and threw up twice. I couldn't believe he'd managed to taint Dad's memory like that. The next morning, I woke up to my phone blowing up. Wayne had posted a long Facebook post about finally speaking his truth at the funeral. He tagged a bunch of Dad's friends and family. The comments were a mix of support for him and people defending Dad. It was a complete nightmare. I tried calling Wayne, but he didn't answer. I drove to his apartment, but he wasn't there. His roommate Brian told me Wayne had been planning this for weeks. Said Wayne had been practicing his speech, laughing about how he was going to destroy the old man one last time. Brian seemed uncomfortable telling me this, like he was just realizing how messed up it was. I went home and made my own social media post, telling the truth about Wayne. I included specific examples of things he'd done over the years. I mentioned the time he culled our neighbor's cat when he was 12, the time he pushed me down the stairs and told everyone I tripped, the CPS report that cost Dad his job. I posted everything. Within an hour, Wayne called me, screaming. He threatened to sue me for defamation, said he had evidence of Dad's abuse that he'd release if I didn't take down my post. I knew he was bluffing. There couldn't be evidence of something that never happened. I hung up on him. That night, someone broke into my apartment. I was at my friend Kayla's place, thank God. They trashed everything. My clothes were cut up, furniture broken, and walls spray painted with the words, "Liar," and Daddy's little girl. I knew immediately it was Wayne. The police came but said there wasn't much they could do without proof. I filed a report anyway. I stayed at Kayla's for a few days while cleaning up my place. During that time, Wayne started contacting Dad's friends one by one. He sent them fake evidence, photoshopped pictures, made up stories, even a journal he claimed was his childhood diary. Some people actually believed him. Dad's cousin Alan called me, asking if I was sure nothing had happened. It made me sick. I decided I needed real proof of Wayne's lies. I remember Dad kept a box of important papers in his house. I went over there. It was still in probate since Dad's will was being processed. I found the box in his closet and started going through it. There were medical records from our childhood, school reports, and, jackpot, a stack of letters from Mom after she left. In the letters, Mom wrote about how she regretted believing Wayne's lies about me. She described specific incidents where Wayne had manipulated her. She even mentioned the jewelry incident that made her leave. These letters proved everything. Dad had kept them all these years. I was about to leave when I heard the front door open. Wayne walked in, looking surprised to see me there. He quickly recovered and asked what I was doing. I clutched the box of papers to my chest and told him I was just collecting some of Dad's things. He didn't buy it. "What's in the box, sis?" he asked, moving toward me. I backed up until I hit the wall. Wayne had always been bigger than me, stronger. I remembered all the times Dad had stepped between us, protected me, but Dad wasn't here anymore. "Nothing important," I lied. "Just some old tax stuff." Wayne lunged for the box. I dodged him and ran for the door, but he caught my arm and yanked me back so hard I dropped everything. Papers went flying across the floor. We both dove for them at the same time. I managed to grab a handful of Mom's letters before Wayne shoved me hard against Dad's bookshelf. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" Wayne snarled, gathering up the rest of the papers. "Dad's dead. Mom's gone. It's your word against mine, and I've always been more convincing." He was right about that. Wayne had always been charming when he needed to be. People believed him. They thought his bad behavior was just typical boy stuff. They never saw what Dad and I saw, the calculated cruelty, the joy he took in causing pain. I clutched the letters I'd managed to save and ran out of the house. Wayne followed me to my car, pounding on my window as I locked the doors. He was screaming that he'd make me sorry, that he'd ruin my life like I'd ruined his. I drove away with him still yelling in my rearview mirror. The next day, I scanned Mom's letters and emailed copies to myself for safekeeping. Then I called Dad's lawyer, David, and told him everything. David had known Dad for decades. He believed me immediately and suggested I get a restraining order against Wayne. I filed for one that afternoon. Wayne must have found out because he showed up at my workplace the next day. I work at a small accounting firm, and suddenly there he was, standing by my desk with that fake concerned look on his face. My co-workers were watching curiously. They'd never met my brother before. "We need to talk," Wayne said quietly. "You're making a big mistake." I told him to leave or I'd call security. He leaned in close and whispered, "I know where you sleep. I know your friends. I know everything about you. This isn't over." My boss Alexis saw what was happening and came over. She asked if everything was okay. Wayne immediately switched to his charming persona, introducing himself as my concerned brother. He told Alexis he was worried about my mental state since Dad died, that I was making up stories and lashing out. Alexis looked uncomfortable but didn't challenge him. After Wayne finally left, I had a panic attack in the bathroom. I couldn't breathe thinking about what he might do next. Wayne had always been dangerous, but now he seemed completely unhinged. Without Dad as a buffer, I felt completely exposed. That night, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. It contained a video of Wayne talking directly to the camera, crying, showing bruises on his arms that looked freshly made. He claimed Dad had done this to him throughout childhood. At the end, he looked straight into the camera and said, "And my sister helped him. She held me down sometimes. They were both monsters." I nearly threw up. This was a new level of manipulation even for Wayne. He was now trying to implicate me in his fictional abuse. I forwarded the video to David, who told me to save everything but not respond. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. I just needed to hold out until then. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking my doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. Around 2 a.m., I heard a noise outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw Wayne's car parked across the street. He was just sitting there, watching my apartment. I took pictures as evidence and called the police. By the time they arrived, he was gone. I showed up to court the next morning exhausted but determined. I brought all my evidence, the letters from Mom, photos of my trashed apartment, screenshots of Wayne's threatening messages, and the pictures of him stalking my place. I felt prepared. Then Wayne walked in with a woman I'd never seen before. She was dressed professionally and carrying a leather briefcase. A lawyer. Somehow Wayne had managed to afford legal representation. My stomach dropped. I was representing myself. The hearing started, and I presented my case as clearly as I could. I showed the judge everything I had. When it was Wayne's turn, his lawyer stood up and painted me as the unstable one. She claimed I was obsessed with Wayne, that I'd been harassing him since Dad died. She even suggested I was the one who broke into my own apartment for attention. Wayne put on his best sad face, telling the judge he just wanted to help his troubled sister, but was afraid for his safety. The judge looked skeptical, but said he needed time to review all the evidence. He scheduled another hearing for the following week. No temporary restraining order was issued. I left the courthouse feeling defeated. That weekend, things got worse. Wayne somehow got my email password and sent messages to my coworkers from my account. The emails made it look like I was having some kind of breakdown, saying bizarre things about my family and making veiled threats. By Monday morning, Alexis called me into her office and suggested I take some personal time to deal with my grief. It wasn't technically being fired, but it felt like it. I changed all my passwords and went to stay with my friend Kayla again. I was too scared to be alone. Wayne had managed to isolate me, make me look crazy, and now I was on the verge of losing my job. It was exactly what he wanted. The next day, I got a call from Brian, Wayne's roommate. He sounded nervous. He told me Wayne had been acting weird lately, staying up all night making plans, muttering to himself. Brian had overheard Wayne on the phone talking about getting access to Dad's house before the will was settled. Something about finding and destroying evidence. I thanked Brian and immediately called David. He told me the will was still in probate, but Dad had left the house to me. Wayne was getting a small cash inheritance, but no property. David hadn't told Wayne this yet. I asked David if he could speed up the process or at least get me legal access to secure the house. He promised to try. That night, I couldn't sleep again. I kept thinking about what Brian had said. What if Wayne was planning to break into Dad's house? What if there was more evidence there that could help me? I made a decision. I needed to get to the house before Wayne did. I drove to Dad's place at dawn. The neighborhood was quiet. I still had my key, so I let myself in. The house felt empty without Dad. I went straight to his bedroom and started searching. I checked under the mattress, behind drawers, inside books, all the hiding places Dad had used over the years. In the back of his closet, behind a loose floorboard I remembered from childhood, I found a small fireproof box. It was locked, but I remembered Dad kept the key in his fishing tackle box in the garage. I ran to get it, my heart pounding. Inside the box was a USB drive, more letters from Mom, and a small notebook, Dad's journal. I started reading it, and tears filled my eyes. Dad had documented everything Wayne had done over the years. Every incident, every lie, every manipulation. He'd been keeping records since we were kids. The journal even contained notes about the CPS investigation, with names of witnesses who could verify Wayne's lies. I was so absorbed in reading that I didn't hear the front door open. Suddenly, Wayne was standing in the bedroom doorway. He looked furious when he saw what I was holding. "Give me that," he demanded, stepping toward me. I clutched the journal to my chest and backed away. "Number, this is mine. Dad left it for me." Wayne lunged at me. I ducked under his arm and ran for the door, but he grabbed my hair and yanked me backward. I fell hard, the journal flying from my hands. Wayne dove for it, but I kicked out, catching him in the stomach. He doubled over, and I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the journal and the USB drive. I ran down the stairs with Wayne right behind me. At the bottom, he caught up and shoved me into the wall. My head hit hard, and for a second, everything went fuzzy. Wayne grabbed the journal from my hands and started tearing out pages. "You're not ruining this for me," he snarled. "Dad left me nothing in his will, didn't he? This house should be mine." I was dazed, but managed to stumble to the kitchen. Wayne followed, still destroying the journal. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and held it up. "I'm calling the police," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. Wayne laughed. "Go ahead. By the time they get here, all this evidence will be gone, and it'll be your word against mine." Again, he was right. I needed to stall him. I lowered the phone and tried a different approach. I told Wayne I knew about the will, that Dad had left him some money. That seemed to catch his attention. He paused his destruction of the journal and asked how much. I lied, doubling the actual amount. Wayne's eyes lit up with greed. While he was distracted thinking about the money, I noticed the USB drive was still clutched in my other hand. I slipped it into my pocket. At least I'd saved that. "The lawyer said you'll get the money faster if you stop harassing me." I lied again. "The restraining order hearing is delaying everything." Wayne seemed to consider this. "How much faster?" "Months," I said. "Maybe even weeks if you drop everything now." I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. Wayne had always been motivated by immediate gratification. The promise of quick money might be enough to get him to back off, at least temporarily. "Fine," he finally said. "I'll drop the whole thing, but I wanted in writing from the lawyer that I'll get my money right away." I agreed, knowing David would never actually do that, but it bought me time. Wayne tossed the partially destroyed journal onto the counter and walked out, warning me that if I was lying, he'd make me regret it. As soon as he was gone, I grabbed the journal and ran to my car. I drove straight to David's office, hands shaking the whole way. I burst into his office without an appointment and showed him everything I'd found. The journal, the USB drive, the torn pages. David was stunned. "This changes everything," he said, examining Dad's detailed records. "We need to get this to the judge right away." David called the court and managed to move up my restraining order hearing to the next day. He also offered to represent me for free, as a favor to Dad. I nearly cried with relief. That night, I stayed at a hotel under a different name, just to be safe. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not even Kayla. I was terrified Wayne would find out about the expedited hearing and try to stop me. The next morning, I met David at the courthouse. We went over our strategy one last time before heading in. To my surprise, Wayne showed up alone. No lawyer this time. He looked confident until he saw David sitting beside me. Then his smirk faltered. The hearing began, and David presented the new evidence methodically. He showed the judge Dad's journal, the USB drive containing scanned copies of all the records Dad had kept over the years, and the letters from Mom. He called Brian as a witness, who nervously testified about Wayne's recent behavior and threats. Wayne tried to interrupt several times, claiming everything was fabricated, but the judge shut him down. When it was Wayne's turn to speak, he fumbled through his defense, contradicting himself multiple times. Without his lawyer there to guide him, his true nature started to show through. He got angry, then defensive, then tried to charm his way out of it. Nothing worked. The judge granted the restraining order. Wayne was legally required to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my home, and my workplace. He was also barred from contacting me in any way. No calls, texts, emails, or social media. The relief I felt was overwhelming. As we left the courtroom, Wayne tried to approach me one last time. David stepped between us, reminding Wayne of the order that had just been issued. Wayne's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed before storming off. David assured me the restraining order had teeth. If Wayne violated it, he'd be arrested. I wanted to believe that would be enough to keep him away, but I knew my brother. He wouldn't give up that easily. I was right. Over the next few weeks, Wayne found ways to harass me without technically violating the order. He'd park just outside the 500-foot boundary of my apartment and watch. He'd send friends to check on me with messages from him. He'd create fake social media accounts to comment on my posts. Each time I documented everything and reported it to the police. They were sympathetic, but said there wasn't much they could do unless he explicitly violated the order. It was maddening. Then one day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was my mom. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She'd heard about Dad's death from a distant relative and had seen some of Wayne's posts online. She was confused and wanted to know what was happening. I broke down crying on the phone. I told her everything, about Dad's final months, about Wayne's behavior at the funeral, about the restraining order. I mentioned the letters she'd written to Dad that I'd found, the ones where she expressed regret for believing Wayne's lies. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mom started crying too. She admitted she'd been wrong to leave, wrong to believe Wayne over Dad and me. She explained that after Dad had made Wayne call her to confess, she'd been too ashamed to come back. The guilt of abandoning me had been overwhelming, and she'd convinced herself that staying away was better than facing what she'd done. She asked if we could meet. I was hesitant, but agreed to coffee in a public place. Seeing Mom after all these years was surreal. She looked older, of course, but still recognizable. We sat awkwardly at first, neither sure what to say. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. "I kept copies of all the letters I sent your father," she said, pushing them toward me. "And I kept a journal too, about Wayne, about the things I noticed but ignored because I didn't want to believe my son could be like that." I flipped through the pages. Mom had documented incidents from Wayne's early childhood, cruelty that started long before I was even born. There were notes from his preschool teachers expressing concern about his behavior with other children. There were her own observations of his lack of empathy, his manipulation, his lies. "Why didn't you do something?" I asked, trying not to sound accusatory. Mom looked down at her coffee. I was scared and in denial. By the time I realized how serious it was, I'd already left. "I convinced myself it was your father's problem now." She paused. I was a coward. I didn't disagree, but I also saw a potential ally, someone else who knew the truth about Wayne, who had evidence. I asked if she'd be willing to make a statement to help strengthen the restraining order. She agreed immediately. We went to David's office together that afternoon. Mom gave a detailed statement about Wayne's childhood behavior, corroborating everything Dad had documented. David was optimistic this would help if Wayne violated the restraining order. As we were leaving David's office, my phone rang. It was Kayla, sounding panicked. Someone had broken into my apartment again. This time, they'd left a dead rat on my bed with a knife through it. The police were already there. Mom and I rushed to my place. The police were taking photos when we arrived. One officer, a woman named Officer Gray, took me aside. She seemed to actually believe me when I told her it was Wayne. She asked detailed questions about his history, about the restraining order, about his patterns of behavior. She took copies of all my documentation. "This is escalating," Officer Gray warned me. "He's getting bolder, more aggressive. You should consider staying somewhere else for a while." I looked around my violated apartment and knew she was right. I couldn't stay there. Mom immediately offered her place, but I was hesitant. We just reconnected after years apart. Plus, if Wayne found out I was with her, he might target her too. In the end, I accepted Kayla's offer to stay with her again. Her apartment had a doorman and security cameras. It felt safer. Mom promised to keep in touch and to be careful herself in case Wayne tried to contact her. That night at Kayla's, I got a text from an unknown number. "Rats die easily. So do people." I showed it to Kayla, who insisted on calling the police right away. Officer Gray came personally to take the report. She told me they were building a case against Wayne for stalking and harassment, but needed more evidence of direct threats. The next day, I went with Officer Gray to get the security footage from my apartment building. The cameras had caught someone in a hoodie entering through the back door, but their face wasn't visible. It wasn't enough to prove it was Wayne. I was starting to feel hopeless. Wayne was always one step ahead, always careful enough to avoid consequences. I wondered if I'd ever be free of him. Then Brian called again. He sounded terrified. He told me Wayne had completely lost it after the restraining order. He'd trashed their apartment, threatened Brian with a knife, and was now planning something big. Something to end this once and for all. Brian had moved out and was staying with his parents, too scared to go back. I asked Brian if he'd be willing to tell the police what he knew. He hesitated, but eventually agreed. I connected him with Officer Gray, who took his statement over the phone. It still wasn't enough for an arrest, but it added to the mounting evidence against Wayne. That weekend, Mom invited me and Kayla to her house for dinner. It was strange being back in her home after so many years. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps of our time apart. Mom showed me old photos, including some of Dad when they were younger. It was bittersweet. As we were looking through the albums, Mom mentioned that Wayne had called her the day before. My blood ran cold. She quickly assured me she hadn't told him where I was staying. Apparently, Wayne had tried to convince her I was mentally ill, that I'd fabricated everything about him. Mom didn't believe him. He asked about your childhood, Mom said, frowning. Specific questions about incidents I might remember. It felt like he was fishing for something he could use against you. That worried me. Wayne was still building his narrative, still trying to paint me as the unstable one. I wondered what he was planning. I got my answer the next day. Wayne had somehow managed to contact my old therapist from college, Dr. Hollis. I'd seen her briefly for anxiety during my sophomore year. Wayne had convinced her I was having a psychiatric emergency and needed intervention. Dr. Hollis, concerned, had reached out to Alexis at my workplace. Alexis called me, worried. She told me Wayne had presented himself as my emergency contact and had shown Dr. Hollis fake emails supposedly from me, talking about Sewer's Lidle thoughts. Dr. Hollis, bound by professional ethics, had felt obligated to reach out when she couldn't contact me directly. I was furious. This was a new low, even for Wayne. I immediately called Dr. Hollis to clear things up. She was horrified when I explained the situation. She apologized profusely and promised to document Wayne's deception, another piece of evidence for the growing case against him. Later that day, I met with Officer Gray again. I showed her the latest development with Dr. Hollis. Gray seemed increasingly concerned about Wayne's escalating behavior. She told me they were close to having enough for an arrest warrant, but needed something more concrete, a clear violation of the restraining order or an explicit threat. He's too smart for that, I said, frustrated. He knows exactly how far he can push without crossing the legal line. Officer Gray nodded grimly. People like your brother often make mistakes when they get desperate, and from what I'm seeing, he's getting very desperate. She was right. Wayne's attempts to discredit me were getting more frantic, more obvious. He was making mistakes. The question was whether those mistakes would happen before or after he did something truly dangerous. I spent the next few days jumping at every noise, checking over my shoulder constantly. I took different routes to and from places, never established patterns. I was living like a hunted animal, and it was exhausting. Then, exactly 3 weeks after the restraining order was issued, Wayne made his big move. I was at Kayla's apartment alone. She was at work. I heard a knock at the door and checked the peephole. It was a delivery guy with flowers. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain on. The delivery guy held up a beautiful arrangement of lilies, Dad's favorite. He said they were for me. I asked who they were from, but he just shrugged and said the order was placed online. I reluctantly accepted them, bringing the vase inside. There was a card nestled among the flowers. I opened it, expecting some kind of threat from Wayne. Instead, it was a sympathy card, seemingly from one of Dad's old colleagues, Indigo. It expressed condolences and mentioned a memorial gathering happening that evening at Dad's favorite restaurant. I was confused. I hadn't heard about any memorial. I called the restaurant to confirm, and they said yes. A private room had been booked under the name Remembering Thomas, my dad's name. I called a few of Dad's friends, but none of them knew anything about it. Something felt off. I called David, who agreed it seemed suspicious. He offered to go with me to check it out. I was tempted to just ignore it, but what if it was legitimate? What if Dad's friends had organized something and just forgotten to tell me directly? I decided to drive by the restaurant with David, just to see who was there before going in. We parked across the street at the appointed time and watched. A few people entered the restaurant, but no one I recognized from Dad's circle. Then I saw Wayne's car pull up. It's a trap, I said to David. He set this whole thing up. David immediately called the police, reporting a restraining order violation. While we waited for them to arrive, we watched Wayne enter the restaurant. About 10 minutes later, Officer Gray and another officer pulled up. They went inside while David and I waited in the car. After what felt like forever, Officer Gray came back out, with Wayne in handcuffs. She walked him to the police car and put him in the back. Then she came over to us. "We got him," she said, looking satisfied. "He admitted he sent the flowers and set up the fake memorial. He was waiting inside to talk to you. Clear violation of the restraining order." I felt a wave of relief so intense I nearly collapsed. Wayne was finally facing consequences. Officer Gray explained he'd be held pending a bail hearing, and given his history of harassment and the violation of the court order, she expected bail to be set high if granted at all. As the police car with Wayne inside pulled away, I watched my brother's face through the window. For the first time since Dad died, he looked afraid. Not angry, not calculating, afraid. It was over, at least for now. David drove me back to Kayla's place. I was emotionally drained but relieved. Wayne would be out of my life for at least a little while. And with all the evidence we'd gathered, Dad's journal, Mom's statements, Brian's testimony, Dr. Hollis's documentation, and now this clear violation, we had a strong case for extending the restraining order indefinitely. That night, I slept without checking the locks multiple times, without jumping at every sound. It wasn't a permanent solution. Wayne wouldn't be in jail forever, but it was a start, a chance to breathe, a chance to begin healing. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. She wanted to know if I'd consider moving in with her while I looked for a new place, somewhere Wayne wouldn't know about, somewhere I could start fresh. I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about second chances, about rebuilding what Wayne had tried so hard to destroy. I texted back one word: yes. Mom came to pick me up the next day. It was weird seeing her pull up in her little blue Honda. I hadn't been in her car since I was a kid. We loaded up my stuff from Kayla's place pretty quick. I didn't have much since most of my things were still trashed from Wayne's break-in. Kayla gave me a big hug before I left. She'd been such a lifesaver through all this crap. The drive to Mom's place was awkward at first. We made small talk about the weather and traffic. Eventually, she asked about Wayne's bail hearing, which was scheduled for tomorrow. I told her David thought the judge would set bail high because of the restraining order violation. Mom nodded and gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I should have seen it sooner," she said suddenly. "All the signs were there from when he was little. I just didn't want to believe it. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me was still angry at her for leaving, for believing Wayne over me, but another part understood how manipulative he was. He'd fooled a lot of people over the years. Mom's house was smaller than I remembered. She downsized after the divorce. She showed me to the guest room, which she'd already set up with fresh sheets and towels. It felt strange having my own space in her home after all these years. That night, we ordered pizza and watched an old movie we both used to like. It wasn't exactly comfortable, but it wasn't terrible either. We were both trying, and that counted for something. The next morning, David called with news from the bail hearing. Wayne had been denied bail. The judge cited the escalating pattern of harassment and clear disregard for court orders as reasons to keep him in custody until trial. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Wayne would be locked up for at least a few weeks, maybe months. I decided to use this time to get my life back on track. First, I called Alexis at work to explain everything. I sent her copies of all the evidence we'd gathered, including Dr. Hollis's statement about Wayne's deception. Alexis was horrified when she realized how she'd been manipulated. She offered me my job back immediately, with paid leave until I felt ready to return. I accepted gratefully. Next, I contacted my landlord about breaking my lease. When I explained the situation and mentioned the police reports about the break-ins, he was surprisingly understanding. He even offered to return my security deposit in full, which never happens. I guess sometimes people can be decent. With work and housing sorted, I focused on the legal stuff. David was pushing for criminal charges beyond just the restraining order violation. He had meetings with the district attorney, showing them all our evidence of Wayne's harassment, threats, and break-ins. The DA seemed interested, but wanted more solid proof connecting Wayne to the apartment vandalism. That's when Brian came through again. He texted me saying he'd found something in their apartment after Wayne was arrested. He'd been cleaning out Wayne's stuff when he discovered a box hidden in the air vent. Inside were photos of my trashed apartment, the dead rat, and even a list of ways to make her suffer in Wayne's handwriting. Brian was freaked out and brought everything straight to Officer Gray. This was the smoking GN we needed. The DA filed additional charges against Wayne for criminal harassment, stalking, breaking and entering, and property damage. When Wayne found out about the new charges, he completely lost it in jail. He attacked a guard and got thrown in solitary, not exactly helping his case. Meanwhile, I was slowly adjusting to living with Mom. We had our awkward moments and a few arguments, but mostly we were figuring things out. One night over dinner, she showed me a box of my old stuff she'd kept all these years. School projects, birthday cards I'd made her, even my baby blanket. I was surprised she'd saved it all. "I never stopped loving you," she said quietly. "I just failed you, badly." I didn't say I forgave her, because I wasn't sure if I did yet, but I told her I was glad we were trying now. That was the truth. About 3 weeks after Wayne's arrest, David called with news about Dad's will. The probate process was finally complete. The house was officially mine, along with Dad's savings and retirement accounts. Wayne's small inheritance was being held pending the outcome of his criminal case. David suggested I consider selling the house, given all the bad memories attached to it. I went to Dad's place one last time to decide what to do. Mom offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. The house felt different now, knowing Wayne couldn't hurt me there anymore. I walked through each room slowly, remembering the good times with Dad. There were a lot of them, despite Wayne's constant shadow. In Dad's bedroom, I found his old watch in the nightstand drawer. It was nothing fancy, just a simple Timex he'd worn every day. I put it on my wrist even though it was too big. It made me feel like he was still protecting me somehow. After a few hours, I made my decision. I wasn't going to sell the house, at least not yet. It was the last place Dad had been happy, the last place he'd been alive. I wasn't ready to let that go. Instead, I hired a cleaning service to deep clean everything, then a security company to install cameras and a new alarm system. If I ever did move back in, I wanted to feel safe there. The weeks turned into months. Wayne's trial date kept getting pushed back because he kept firing his public defenders. By the third lawyer, the judge was losing patience. Wayne also wasn't doing himself any favors by continuing to cause problems in jail. He'd gotten into 2 more fights and was caught trying to smuggle in contraband. Each incident added to his growing file. During this time, I slowly rebuilt my life. I went back to work part-time, then full-time. I started seeing a new therapist who specialized in family trauma. I even went on a few dates, though nothing serious. The guy I met for coffee was nice enough, but I wasn't ready for a relationship yet. Too much baggage to unpack first. Mom and I settled into a routine that worked for us. We weren't best friends, but we were family again. She helped me sort through Dad's belongings when I was ready, and I helped her plant a garden in her backyard. Small steps toward something like normal. 4 months after Wayne's arrest, we finally got a trial date. The DA was confident in their case, especially with all the evidence Brian had provided. Wayne's latest lawyer was pushing for a plea deal, but Wayne refused. He still believed he could charm his way out of this, just like he always had. The trial was set for Monday. On Friday night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered it. It was Wayne. Somehow, he'd gotten access to a phone in jail. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice cold. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." I hung up immediately and called Officer Gray. She said they'd investigate how Wayne got phone privileges and make sure it didn't happen again. She also suggested I stay with someone else for the weekend, just to be safe. Wayne was locked up, but he might have friends on the outside willing to do him favors. I didn't want to panic, but I also didn't want to take chances. I asked Mom if we could stay at a hotel for the weekend. She agreed without hesitation. We packed overnight bags and checked into a Holiday Inn across town. Not exactly luxury accommodations, but it felt safer than being at home. Saturday passed uneventfully. We watched bad cable TV and ordered room service. Mom hit me at cards 4 times in a row. It was almost like a weird mini vacation. Sunday morning, we got a call from David. There had been a fire at Mom's house overnight. The fire department had contained it quickly, but there was significant damage to the kitchen and living room. The cause was suspicious. It looked like someone had broken a window and thrown something flammable inside. I felt sick. This had Wayne written all over it. Even from jail, He was finding ways to hurt me. Mom was upset about her house but more worried about me. She kept saying we could have been there, could have been hurt, or worse. The thought made my skin crawl. Officer Gray met us at the house. The place smelled like smoke and chemicals. Yellow police tape blocked off the damaged areas. Gray confirmed they suspected arson and were already investigating. She asked if I'd received any threats recently. I told her about Wayne's call. "We need to move you somewhere secure until the trial," she said firmly. "Both of you. This is escalating again." David offered his lake cabin about 2 hours away. It was isolated, hard to find unless you knew where to look, and had good security. We accepted gratefully. Gray arranged for a police escort to take us there, just to be safe. The cabin was rustic, but comfortable. No cell service, which was actually a relief. David had stocked the fridge and pantry for us, so we didn't need to go into town. We settled in to wait for the trial, which was now just 1 day away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Wayne, about how he'd managed to reach out from jail and burn Mom's house. Who was helping him? How far would he go? The questions circled in my head until dawn. Monday morning, David picked us up early for the drive to the courthouse. He updated us on the way. The police had arrested one of Wayne's former cellmates who'd been released the previous week. The guy had confessed to starting the fire in exchange for a reduced sentence on another charge. He claimed Wayne had promised him money to scare us. The courthouse was intimidating. High ceilings, marble floors, armed guards everywhere. We were taken to a small waiting room where the DA, a sharp woman named Ms. Indigo, briefed us on what to expect. I would be testifying first, then Mom, then Brian. The physical evidence would be presented after our testimony. When they called me into the courtroom, my legs felt like jelly. I had to walk past Wayne to get to the witness stand. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, but he still managed to look smug. He winked at me as I passed. I kept my eyes forward and focused on breathing. Testifying was harder than I expected. I had to recount every horrible thing Wayne had done, from childhood to the recent harassment. The defense attorney tried to make me sound unstable, suggesting I had imagined or exaggerated everything because of my difficult relationship with my brother. But I stayed calm and stuck to the facts. When I described finding Dad's journal and the letters from Mom, Wayne's face changed. He hadn't known about those. His lawyer looked surprised too. They hadn't prepared for that level of documentation. Mom testified next. She was nervous, but determined. She admitted her mistakes in believing Wayne over me and Dad. She described the patterns she'd noticed in Wayne's behavior from early childhood. The defense tried to paint her as a neglectful mother trying to shift blame, but Mom owned her failures in a way that made her more credible, not less. Brian was the surprise star witness. He brought printouts of text messages where Wayne had bragged about scaring me, about breaking into my apartment, about planning to make her pay. He described in detail how Wayne had laughed while planning the fake memorial to lure me out. The jury looked disgusted. The physical evidence was damning. The box from Wayne's apartment with photos of my vandalized place. The dead rat with his fingerprints on the knife. The journal pages he'd torn up at Dad's house. The threatening texts from burner phones traced back to accounts he'd created. By the time the prosecution rested, even Wayne looked worried. His defense was weak, mostly trying to suggest I was mentally unstable and had a vendetta against him. They brought up my brief therapy in college as evidence of my instability. I felt desperate. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Wayne guilty on all counts. The judge, citing the calculated and escalating nature of his harassment, sentenced him to 8 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric evaluation and treatment. No possibility of parole for at least 5 years. As the guards led Wayne away, he looked at me one last time. There was no smirk now, no fake charm, just cold hatred. I stared back, refusing to look away first. He was the one who finally broke eye contact as they took him through the door. Outside the courthouse, I felt lightheaded with relief. It was over, really over. Wayne would be locked up for years, far away from me. I could finally start rebuilding my life without looking over my shoulder constantly. Mom hugged me tight on the courthouse steps. David shook my hand, then surprised me with a hug too. Even Officer Gray smiled, which I hadn't seen before. "What now?" Mom asked as we walked to the car. It was a good question. For so long, my life had revolved around protecting myself from Wayne, around gathering evidence and preparing for the trial. Now that it was over, I wasn't sure what came next. "I think I'm going to fix up Dad's house," I said after a moment. "Make it mine. Reclaim it," Mom nodded. "I'll help, if you want." I did want that, I realized. Not just her help with the house, but her presence in my life. We'd never have a perfect mother-daughter relationship. Too much had happened for that, but we could have something real, something honest. 2 weeks later, I moved back into Dad's house, my house now. The security system was top-notch, with cameras covering every approach. I'd repainted the walls, replaced the furniture Wayne had damaged, and rearranged everything to make it feel different. New, but with echoes of Dad still there. Mom came over most weekends to help with projects. We were remodeling the kitchen when she found an old photo album tucked behind the refrigerator. It was full of pictures of Dad with me as a baby, as a toddler, as a kid. In every photo, he looked so proud, so protective. He was a good father, Mom said softly, tracing a picture of Dad holding my hand at what looked like a zoo. The best, I agreed. We kept working, the album open on the counter between us. It felt right somehow, rebuilding the house with memories of Dad watching over us. He'd protected me my whole life. Now it was my turn to protect his memory, to make sure the truth about him was what survived. A month after the trial, I got a letter from Wayne's prison. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside was a single page covered in his handwriting. It wasn't an apology. I hadn't expected one. It was a promise that he'd never forget what I'd done to him, that he'd think about me every day for the next 8 years, planning what he'd do when he got out. I should have been scared, but I wasn't. I folded the letter carefully and put it in a fireproof box with all the other evidence I'd gathered. If Wayne ever came near me again after his release, I'd be ready. I wouldn't be caught off guard like before, but that was a problem for future me. For now, I had a life to live, a job I enjoyed, a house I was making my own, a healing relationship with my mom, and friends who'd stood by me through everything. Wayne had tried to destroy all of that, but he'd failed. Dad would be proud of that, I think. He'd always taught me to stand up for myself, to fight back when necessary. In the end, that's exactly what I'd done. I'd fought back and won. As I sealed the box containing Wayne's letter, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't waste the next 8 years looking over my shoulder or living in fear. I'd use that time to build something Wayne could never touch, a life full of connections, purpose, and joy. The best revenge against someone who wanted to destroy me wasn't hatred or fear. It was thriving, despite everything he'd done. I put the box away in my closet, closed the door, and went downstairs to where Mom was waiting with paint samples for the living room. We had work to do, and for the first time in a very long time, I was looking forward to the future.